Welcome to NAV this evening. My name is Anna, and we have Daniel and Johanna made the soup, and this is Schmachtenberger. And yeah, we're very excited to have you all here, and of course, Daniel, Nate, and Nora. We have a lot of people on YouTube watching this now. And we also have 2 NAV hubs for the first time. You can see them there. So I will hand over to you, Schmachtenberger.
So I will just be a kind of frame holder. I will not have any other function than actually in the break, when we have listened, we were going to invite you to talk a little bit to be able to maybe give some reflections back to you that the dialogue can grasp some of what is happening inside you. But otherwise, I don't think that these 3 people really need an introduction, or we will not do that because I feel you will absolutely talk for yourself. But we have Mats Kvarsfors, so who will bring us some music first. Welcome, and welcome all 3 of you.
Yeah. So I will. Nora asked me this morning, "Can you play?" And I said, "Okay." But I thought, so this is Sweden meeting America again. So I'm gonna play one Swedish folk music now, a Swedish blues from the 1700s. And later on, I'll do the American one. Okay, enjoy.
I'm super happy to be here with you. Nate Hagens is here with us as well tonight. All of these wonderful souls are also joining us on this adventure that we're about to go on. I'm so glad we started with a piece of music.
That was amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, Mats Kvarsfors, my beloved husband. It's beautiful. The arc of the evening or the morning, wherever you are in the world, is going to be that we're going to do the first chunk of time, and I'm definitively not giving a number to that. It's a chunk. Whatever the chunk needs to be, it shall be. Daniel and I will be in conversation. And then Nate Hagens is going to join us and bring some of his reflections, what comes up for you while we're wandering. And then we'll take a little break and let you all have some time to think about what has come up. And then we will have some time for us to all be in conversation together in the room. So that's where we're going tonight, and I hope that sounds good to all of you. So let's begin. It's hard to know where the beginning is of this sort of thing. I think one thing that I would like to start with is the recognition that our institutions and the structures that our societies are held within are not prepared and are not prepared to be prepared to respond to the needs of the people in the way that is needed. This is true not only with health services or with defense services or with food services or with mental health services, economic services, etc. We've seen several events just in the last few months where fires in Maui or floods in Libya or earthquakes in Morocco or runaway disinformation algorithms, the opioid crisis, etc., where there wasn't the capability of the existing systems to actually respond. In the work that I've been doing with warm data, one of the things that I've been most concerned with is how to make it possible for people to be there for each other. And what does that mean? What would that take? Because you can't tell people to be respectful of each other. You can't tell people they have to help each other. You can't mandate that. You can't send them to a class for this is how you do this, because they don't know what they're going to be facing. The main thing is, can they learn together? Can they meet chaos together? How do we meet chaos together with as much love and care and grace and creativity, improvisation as possible? So that's where I thought we would start. And you sent me this great message from the car, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're going to say.
I just sent the message that she's going to get to meet a very fevered version of my brain tonight, because can you guys hear me with this? I'm actually quite ill, but the Tylenol is hiding it. I canceled everything yesterday and today with the exception of this, but I didn't want to cancel this because last time I was here, this was the community that I felt most connected to in Sweden. It felt like there were a lot of people here really earnestly trying to do the most important work they could. Pella, I met last time, is working on making ecocide an actual crime against humanity at the ICC. It's like an incredible project. There are people here working on planetary boundaries, and so I really wanted to be with everybody, and I just want to apologize for not being all that coherent tonight and for not being here early to get to greet and talk with everybody, and I probably won't be able to stay late, but I wanted to show up. I would also say take everything I say with extra grains of salt tonight. You were saying, how do we be with chaos together? And we're going to get a chance to find out soon. And you were saying that the institutions aren't prepared to handle it, and I would say the most powerful institutions that run the world are criminally insane. It's not just that they're not prepared to handle it or they're slightly antiquated. I don't think we've had a war in a long time, at least since World War II, that the US has been involved in that wasn't a false flag war. We know that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but we actually know that Cheney and Rumsfeld knew there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and 4.5 million people were murdered as a result of the activities that started. And the banks and financial services groups that require exponentiation of the monetary supply, Venusifying the planet, and driving biodiversity loss and all those things, like, this is not just unprepared to deal with the moment. This is suicidal, omnicidal, criminally insane. And yeah, that's what. So what was on my mind is that there's a cognitive dissonance, because when the things that are threatening global catastrophic risk are mostly invisible. You can't see them. They're hyperobjects. You can't see climate change. You can see weather, but there was always weather. But to know that the extreme weather is statistically worse and worsening, you have to do math. And you can question the math if you don't know how to do the math properly. And you can't see species extinction, and you can't see the rate of AI growth, and you can't see synthetic bios, total vulnerability landscape. All of these are radical abstractions of complexities. And what you see looks pretty fine. In fact, it looks more convenient than ever. Amazon just delivers stuff to your door. And so in the past, when a civilization would face a catastrophic risk, it was either because there was a imminent natural disaster coming that everybody saw, or there was war coming that everybody saw. And in that place, people were ready to mobilize. In the presence of an attacking army, you stopped focusing on quality of life and competing with the neighbors and started focusing on survival. Right now, what is at risk is radically more than all previous catastrophic events combined, and it's invisible. And so there's this cognitive dissonance if we actually need to be in something much more like wartime mentality, but everything looks fine. And then people will say, you know, don't you need work-life balance and shit like that, that is totally not cognizant of the actual world we're in.
And there are a lot of, I think, people who are not necessarily criminally evil working inside these institutions at the bottom: teachers, doctors, people working in various parts of the system that are believing they're trying to help people in some way and are earnestly doing their best, and they can't. So this is something that I see all the time, is that if you're talking about, well, you can start anywhere. And the issue is never just one thing. So you end up with somebody who is suffering from a diagnosis of some mental health thing, and you figure out that, well, there's also a lack of food, and there's also a lack of family, and there's also all sorts of other things that are happening in that are producing these symptoms that are consequences of many complex systems coming together. And I would suggest that probably in this room there's not very many people who don't have some kind of crisis in their life. And how do we actually get through the day together, continuing to keep life as usual going, when life as usual is deadly, but stopping is also deadly. And this is the double bind. If we stop all these systems, then we don't have work, we don't have money, we don't have big ag, we don't have big pharma, we don't have all of these functional institutional processes. We can't do that. But if we keep them going, we're like lemmings. And they're in contradiction. So in many cases, if you're dealing with a teenager at risk, that's going to be a story of a legal crisis through the eyes of the law. Is this person behaving according to the law or not according to the law? In terms of the education system, that this person is defined in terms of how are they doing in school, what are their grades, and what is their class behavior. In terms of their technological usage, we can see where they've been surfing around. Their family sees perhaps how they're different, how they're behaving differently than the father or the mother did when they were young. But who saw the kid? So there's a perception also of the complexity that leads us to responses that enhance the problems that we're in. If we're responding to one fragment at a time, we end up creating responses that are also within the logic of that fragmentation. And that's the key. It's the logic itself of that. That is, so you can't just make a quick fix of, well, we'll just have a systemic approach to this, and this is what it's going to look like. Because likely, even in the thinking of the systemic approach is the logic of perpetuation.
Yeah, I don't think there really are any problems in the world. We talk about the distinction between problems and predicaments, or problems and wicked problems, or whatever. Problems admit a full solution, and I think that those mostly don't exist outside of very narrow engineering applications. And the way we define problems is at the heart of all the problems we create. Because the problem is too much CO2 in the atmosphere, so we can create an approach to sequester CO2 that involves putting more nitrogen and phosphorus runoff into waterways, or an approach to, there are so many ways to solve a particular problem and end up externalizing harm to other areas. And in general, when we think about the way we define a problem, we define a problem where the solution is going to be measurable, so we can assess if we're on track or not with a small number of metrics or KPIs, and where the effect of how we're trying to solve the problem is usually a first-order effect. We're creating a technology or a law or a business to have a first-order effect on a small number of variables. But it'll also, whatever we create, will have second and third and fourth order effects on a very large number of unknown variables. So it is epistemologically harder to ensure that you aren't causing problems in a lot of other areas than it is to just look at how to solve that narrow problem. So sometimes people say to me that they have ideas and they're excited about their idea, and then I say, here's the types of harm that are likely to come from them doing that, and that's agency damaging. And I'm okay being agency damaging if it would be like the AI risk right now is mostly being accelerated by the companies that were created to solve AI risk, right? DeepMind was further ahead in AI, so OpenAI was created to try to solve AI risk, and then OpenAI is the one that takes it to market after getting acquired by Microsoft and getting forced to do so, and then Anthropic broke off from OpenAI to be more focused on AI risk and then took $300 million from Google, and now there's a full-on commercial arms race advancing AI as fast as possible, where the ones at the front were the ones supposedly trying to solve the problem. And that's mostly the nature of how it works. So if humanity just stopped, that would be much better. And so I want people to feel a sense of agency of how to move forward, but a sense that acknowledges the real complexity of things, which means that you have to look at, for whatever problem you're trying to address, what are all the upstream causes of that? What are all the perverse incentives? What are all the externalities of institutional choice-making architectures? What are all the social traps at play? What are all the mindsets at play? What is the rest of the technological ecosystem driving that thing? And if it's expressing as this thing and you remove that thing, does it just express somewhere else? And then if you change this thing, what are all the downstream effects of that? So there's a certain kind of meta-agency that is how to not feel agency because you feel confused and overwhelmed, but to stay with it and to keep trying to learn more until you come to a place where some clarity emerges. That's not the agency of I know what to do, but it's the agency of I care enough that I can't do anything other than inquire about what might be worth doing until something comes clear.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I think there's a fear that if we somehow create, if complexity and contextual process turns into determinism, that there will be some loss of free will, and that there will be this agency vacuum. And really, what's lost there is a sense of morale, is a sense of membership and participation that could be potentially replaced with a despair and apathy even. But one thing that I have found in my own work is that the more people are able to perceive contextual and transcontextual process, which sounds complex, but actually it's easier than you think. The more there is this other kind of agency that steps in, that comes in, and it's agency not to first order action. It's agency to nth order action. And it looks so different. It looks almost incoherent, because it isn't a response that looks like the problem. It's not matching the problem, it's meeting the problem. And that meeting is of a totally different order and aesthetic and cadence of response. I have met a few people in my life who were just very good at that. And many people who, like myself, who keep trying. It's a practice, though. It's really a practice. It's recognizing whatever it is that comes up in front of you that you're facing, no matter how, it's some issue at home or some issue with your partner or big global issues, that there's much more happening around it. And that practice of just every time recognizing, I'm not going to be seduced by the alarm bells of this very exciting moment, whether I'm angry or thrilled or in love or whatever it is. I'm going to, like you said, take the time, pay attention to what's going on around, behind. What are the mindsets? There's so many ghosts moving through us. Ghosts of, this is how it is. This is one of the most seductive ideas. This is how it is. And once you get caught in the this is how it is-ness, it's very difficult to talk yourself out of it, to see another is. And we have to get our kids to school because they've got to go to school, because they got to get jobs, because they got to take part in the system, because this is how it is. Or whatever else. There's a million versions.
We have to win the arms race because if we don't build the weapon, we'll lose, and they're building the weapon, and we have to provide this much IRR to if we want to do impact, to the investors, because otherwise we won't have enough money to do anything meaningful. And I had a friend just the other day who was proposing that we make a public-private partnership to solve the AI synthetic bio issue, where the companies themselves that are advancing the synthetic bio AI technology are the ones that write the legislation to bind themselves. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding? Like, are you being honest that you really are proposing this? And he's like, well, that's how it works in DC. You always have revolving doors. And I'm like, that's why we're going to go extinct. But that's how it is. That's how it is. And that's how it is in the world system. The human-made world system is on a imminent, in your lifetime, extinction path. So learning how biology is and how physics is and how ecology is, and figuring out how to change the world system, the criminally insane world system, to be compatible with it, is the only chance for there to be an is at all for humans. Continuing. I want to plug something real quick. How many people here have done Nora's warm data? Not as many as I would have thought. Maybe a third. Okay. In the Tao Te Ching it says, in the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. In the acquisition of knowledge, every day something is gained. And those don't have to be incompatible. They can actually dance together. And I see that what Nora figured out how to do with warm data was really the dance between those, where someone is dropping the rigid ways of seeing things while learning to see things a lot more ways. So they have a lot more complexity with less certainty at the same time. Right? They're dropping certainty, but they're getting lots of new insights, which means there's a lot of new possibilities through what had seemed impossible. And one of the things that's so interesting about it is that it looks like a elementary school activity. It looks like some really fucking benign thing. And but when she asks what is music in the context of the financial media production industry, or what is music in the context of culture, or what is music in the context of healing, or what is music in the context of family, or what is music in the context of death ritual, and someone gets to think, wow, it's so many different things, they stop thinking what is music is a reasonable concept. It's in what contexts. And across enough different things, they stop thinking of anything as a static thing and thinking of everything as something embedded in lots of different contexts, which means there have to be lots of different ways to see anything, or you're just radically reducing the world. So I will admit that I will admit that I think we're probably going to fail as a species pretty soon. And that I would like that not to happen. And for it not to happen, I would like a really intense call to action where people stop being comfortable and focusing on the shit that they normally focus on. I would love to see Sthlm have something that is like Extinction Rebellion is the right type of framing, right? If you are working on the most important thing you know to serve some aspect of the continuity and thriving of life, I would like you to just deepen your passion for that and your skills at it. If you are working on anything else, I would love for you to quit what you're doing. Seriously, downsize your life. You don't need as much stuff. Quit what you're doing and really think about how you could make your life possibly in service to the most important time that has ever been for life. I would love to see a movement here happen where people are meeting regularly, talking super serious conversations. Did everybody see the Stockholm Resilience Center's new report that came out 2 days ago? So you've all seen, it's here in Stockholm, the Planetary Boundaries Report, but the new one, there were a lot of areas that didn't have data. They have data now. And it's not that we are coming up on planetary boundaries, it's that we've surpassed almost all of them radically. It may be too late no matter what we do. I don't think so. I think that biology is amazingly regenerative, but only if we start doing like everything right as rapidly as possible. And so yeah, I would love to see this not just be a weird form of entertaining conversation that gets forgot about and your lives are the same tomorrow. But regular meetings happening to say, what could we actually do to shift this? And I would love to see people getting trained in warm data as part of it, because Nora's right here in Stockholm. And I think being able to bring this as a subversive technology, because it looks like some cute org dev activity, to halls of power that start opening up possibilities to then be able to direct more pointed things into that space. Yeah.
It's always funny to me when Daniel describes warm data, because actually he does it better than I do.
Because reality is, when the Tao Te Ching says the Tao that is speakable in words is not the eternal Tao, Nora is so attuned to that thing that she mostly uses words as poetry to try to evoke a sense of that which is beyond just pure denotation. So I'm trying to just add also denotative clarity to the thing, because it's not your orientation and it shouldn't be.
Thank you. I love that. I need to just stay with you always, I think. Because there is something, when we were first talking about having this conversation, we were thinking about all the ways in which change making and the urgency of this time becomes explicit. There's a lot of structural change. There's a lot of big furniture moving to do. And there are calls for community, calls for collaboration. But you can't have community and you can't have collaboration if you don't have communing. There is no plan that can be implemented upon the peoples of the world that are so divided and hate each other right now. There's no master plan, there's no model that can hold this aspect of what it is that we can actually do together, who we can be together. And the structures and the implications of the structures, right down to the little things, the water comes out of the faucet in your house. Your tax number is your tax number. Your electric bill is your electric bill. We don't meet at the water. We don't have to help each other create things. Everybody's got their own lawnmower or their own power drill or their own. So the individualism, the separation has been so complete that it's in the logic. It's in the air. It's just how it is. It's how it is. Beginning to perceive oneself and each other in this moment. This is a very serious moment to be alive. It requires that there be something that disorients us. And that disorientation is not necessarily an easy sell. Right? So one of the things that happens with warm data is it's disorienting. And the things that come out of it are not what people went into it for, because it's working in multiple contextual ways. And when you're actually working with systemic process, it doesn't end. You don't have a point where you can say, well, let's measure this output, because that isn't the output. So it's disorientation is the gift. Now, this took me years to be able to say this, because it's not a feel-good, but it does feel good. But it feels good kind of like when you take it, if you have ever given blood and you have a tourniquet around your arm and they take it off, and suddenly there's blood flow moving through your limbs in another way. It's that feeling. It really is warm, that there's connection happening physically, intellectually, historically, personally, interpersonally. I remember you once saying, if the defense department would like to actually protect a nation, this is the sort of thing they need to do. Because how do you bring people together without brainwashing them or falling into some authoritarian pattern? Without manipulation or authoritarianism, how do you make change?
This will seem like a non sequitur. How many people have heard me talk about the meta crisis somewhere? Is this familiar? Okay. So I can describe the generative dynamics that give rise to the meta crisis a bunch of different ways. Right? We can talk about it in terms of a linear materials economy bound to a exponential financial system with embedded growth obligations. We can go deeper and talk about perverse incentives and social traps. We can talk about choice-making architectures that have externalities built in. These are underneath all of the various issues. We can go deeper and talk about qualities of mind. Ian McGilchrist, master and emissary, getting reversed type dynamics. But if you asked me simply to state what is the cause of the meta crisis, I could just say sociopaths run the world and everybody else has Asch conformity. And that would be fair. It would be as good as any of the other descriptions. When you're saying the institutions aren't ready to protect the people, Alexander the Great wasn't trying to protect the people. Genghis Khan wasn't trying to protect the people. The founding fathers of our country, who genocided 100 million Native Americans and enslaved Western Africa, weren't trying to protect the people. You know, we think about how gruesome World War II is with 26 million deaths. That's a quarter of the number of Native Americans we killed to make the Western values that we hold as so civil. And so I think, and you know, when you look at the extreme outliers of different cultures, the most peaceful ones and the most violent ones, the most rational and irrational ones, I find this very interesting because when you look at whole cultures that fall outside of the bell curve of cultures, you can see what human nature can do under certain types of conditioning across a distribution of humans, not just what a person can do that might be some genetic aberration. So if you look at the Jains, or the Quakers, or the Buddhists, if you look at the Jains, you can see millions of people who won't hurt bugs. Human nature can do that. If you look at the Janjaweed, you can see a population that if you make it to adulthood, you've cut people apart with machetes. Human nature can do that. Human nature is extremely adaptive to conditioning. We started doing social science after ubiquitous conditioning. We had made the Industrial Revolution and capitalism and nation states ubiquitous, which is a weird fucking conditioning having nothing to do with our evolutionary history. And then we started doing social science, then called it nature. And then when we see...
Just a second. Please hear that. This is a really important piece because the idea of what is human nature gets thrown around all the time.
Yeah, it's gibberish.
And we point to all sorts of research on what human beings are capable of, or even in cognition, what's possible. And it is actually inside a tautology. The research proves the research here, and the research method itself was created in this ubiquitous conditioning.
Yeah.
So go ahead, sorry.
I had weird fever dreams all night to try to get well. I slept a lot. And I had these dreams about indigenous cultures teaching white people how to talk to animals. It was really beautiful. Really beautiful. So you can have a culture the way Tibet was before it was invaded that is really relatively kind and peaceful, but they don't war well, and they get destroyed by the culture that wars well. But that particular kind of thing, and the reason I bring this up is most of the Mongols weren't Genghis Khan, right? You can condition people ubiquitously to be a certain way, but almost all the wars have been initiated by a small number of people, and then everyone else has to participate. They both get conditioned by those systems, and they are forced to participate in them. But mostly what is driving the economic machine is not the survival of people's kids, it's winning, right? At a massive scale, at a geopolitical nation state, centibillionaire, AI masters of the universe scale. And so there's a Gaussian distribution on psychological attributes, but there's a power law distribution on power. And the people with all the power are outside of the Gaussian distribution in their psychological traits. They're the people who are oriented to and good at getting power, and then in turn make systems that condition everybody else. That has to get fixed. That has to get fixed. It's a fucked up topic to take seriously. If there is to be a future of civilization, that means it has to get addressed. That means anyone who gives a shit about the world who doesn't happen to be a sociopath has to get very active about who's in power and who isn't, and what systems are in power and which ones aren't.
And it's tricky. It's very tricky because sometimes these things come cloaked in sheep's clothing. They look like the systems that are supporting us. They look like your friend. You know, they look like, but we're here for you. You can't live without us. If you take out the billionaires or whatever it is, you're going to, et cetera, et cetera.
Moloch induces Stockholm Syndrome in everyone. Yeah. I've never said that in Stockholm.
So what is implicit change? Where is that? Because there's something that's taking place here. Some way in which you and I have both stepped into another set of patterns of living our lives, of how we spend our days. It's not easy to quit your job and to live differently. It's not easy to simply step out of those relationships, especially when they are your boss, your family, your friends. You could have to do things for very practical reasons. You're caught in it. And this becomes day after day, year after year. This is the thing that I'm hearing you say. This simply cannot continue. There has to be a shift. We have to wake up. There has to be a coming to a different place now. Where is that implicit change? Because how many times have I done something or worked with the Warm Data Lab, for example, and someone says, I don't know, what's the point of this? What's the point? What's in it for me? And there it is. That's the ubiquitous conditioning right there. The second you say, what's the point or what's in it for me? You're in it. There isn't a point in the meadow. Life makes life because life. Right? So wherever this ghost lives, it's deep. And how we think about, what's worthwhile? What's the point? And on the one hand, that thinking is absolutely necessary because a lot of what we're doing is sort of not worthwhile, deadly, in fact. But somehow in the asking of the question, you end up back in the same thinking that got us here. So there's a logic shift, like I was saying earlier. We were going to talk about double binds a little bit and how you get out of a double bind.
I want to say something to the what's in it for me thing.
Yeah.
And what you were saying, underscoring the what we think of as human nature studied under ubiquitous conditioning isn't human nature. I think what's in it for me is an expression of a hollow human who has to always be focused on getting something because they're so empty, from a civilization that has conditioned people to be empty. Because from a supply side economics point of view, it's awesome. Because when there's emptiness and people are looking for what's in it for them, I can sell them a bunch of shit. I can manipulate them in a bunch of ways based on what will be in it for them. But it's so aberrant to the whole history of the human experience. If you think about 200,000 years in tribes, and you think about words like Ubuntu being pretty universal in the tribal culture. I am because we are. If we all weren't, I wouldn't exist. And it's funny taking a job that we don't like, doing something we think is meaningless, or actually contributing to problems so that for the couple weeks a year we get off, we can go camping and live basically a shitty version of an indigenous person's life. Like how that fits in the progress narrative is really funny. So I think that I've noticed when people are camping with their friends, they don't check their phone all the time. They don't go to the fridge and stand looking for something all the time because we evolved to have the stimulus of nature and the stimulus of other human beings and intimate relationships and music and, like very basic things that actually create a fullness of the emotional human. And that when we're put in hypo-normal environments where we all have our own house or we're alone, so we put on the TV to watch faces of other people, or we go to Facebook to watch faces of other people because we're actually tribal beings, but we have not learned how to interact with other humans well, so we don't want to live with other humans. In fact, the only human we'll share space with is the ones we're having sex with and our offspring and nobody else. But then we'll spend all our time watching faces that we don't actually have to interact with or have conflict with. I feel like we live in a radically hypo-normal environment of the real stimuli that create human fulfillment, in which case what's in it for me doesn't even arise in a fulfilled human. And the hypo-normal environment makes us susceptible to hypernormal stimuli, the what's in it for me and the addiction and et cetera. I think and so the story of this is the way humans are when they're conditioned to be that way.
Right. It's not how they are. It's how they are when they're conditioned, exactly. And if you're asking what's in it for me, it's because you want something, because you've been told that you need something, because you lack. And if you're lacking, then you need something. So what's in it for you? And around you go. And this is perfect. But it's also interesting to see how hard that little bugger is to get out of the system. I mean, just paying attention to, how often you think about something you're getting ready to do or someone you're going to meet or where something's going to go. And there is that question, what's in it for me? Where's this going? And I'm fascinated by these invisible ghosts that move through us, like the what's in it for me, or there are a lot of them. There's ideas about the self, and that are very much attached to, if you're thinking about what's in it for me, then who's me? Where's the edge of me? Am I just this person? Or is me my family? Or is me my grandchildren's grandchildren that aren't here yet? Is me my community? Is me my nation? My culture? My religious group? Like, where's the edge of me? Is me my bacteria? And the ecology that they're in? What's in it for which me? And that's an interesting and confusing question. Of which me are we talking about?
I wish that was actually a question people were asking.
Yeah.
I don't think most people are actually inquiring into the nature of self beyond the boundary.
I don't think so either. But it's worth asking.
Yes.
What's in it for which me?
Well, the finiteness of time is a reality no matter what. It would be the case in a totally different civilization that I wouldn't have time to learn every single language and every musical instrument and meet every person and see every beautiful place. And so asking, is this the best use of my life energy aligned with what is most sacred to me and what I'm devoted to, is a good question. But that's a very different question than what's in it for me.
Because it goes back to nth order agency. This is bringing us right back around to that. If you're asking, what am I participating in this membership with life itself, then you're looking at not only the you that is in this skin body, but multiple relationships and relationships and relationships and relationships. There's rigor there. It takes effort to do that. Not really that much, I would have to say, but it takes effort. It takes a moment of stopping and getting out of the script, out of the teleprompter, and noticing that there are these many me's, not mini me's. And that practice I think is actually absolutely vital in this moment for how we get anywhere out of this mess.
I'll share one very tangible thing related to what you just said is our consciousness is being conditioned by our environment all the time, our social environment and our media environment, the information that is coming in. When we started the Consilience Project, I did a project where we curated different Facebook feeds, like made different avatars, curated Facebook feeds, and I had some Facebook feeds that it's obviously different in the US and Sweden here, but that were just a huge amount of videos of cops abusing black people. But what it doesn't show is what percentage of all police interactions that is, because by the time I've seen 100, even if it was over the course of years, but there are tens of thousands of interactions every day, it might be a very statistically small percentage, and there might be a lot where the cops are abusing white people and Latino people, but when all I'm seeing is that, it seems to be the totality of reality, because we evolved in an environment where what our eyes saw showed us reality. And then in watching that, even though I curated it, by the time I had watched it for an hour, I fucking hated cops and thought they were all racist and then I curated another one that showed cops saving kittens from trees and doing heroic stuff and black people attacking cops. And then I was like, back the blue. And I could be affected by the media environment even when I was fucking curating it. And so, after we're done with this conversation, you'll go home and you'll scroll. And it will remove everything we talked about. And then you'll get notifications and you'll have messages. And then, at some point you may or may not remember this conversation. It will be mostly as if it never happened. One way to change that is go change the settings of everything coming in your media environment tonight. Like, just go unfollow a whole bunch of shit and then go intentionally follow a bunch of other shit. Follow the Stockholm Resilience Center so you see planetary boundaries. Follow Nate's stuff so you see that information coming out. Like, follow a bunch of things that will actually keep you apprised of what is really going on that's meaningful. Unfollow the other stuff so that you at least have, because all of marketing and all of politics will try to capture your attention and consciousness in other directions. At least do what you can to have some continuous reminders of what is more important.
That's what we called this talk, what is important. What is important. Sometimes I do an exercise with my classes where I ask people to describe a system, any system, your body, your relationship to your partner, whatever global crisis catches your eye, and to illustrate it. Okay, now most of the time when we illustrate a system, you start by having nodes. Okay, so there's an economy node, or there's a family node, or there's a, here's me, and there's my husband, and here's my kids, and you have these nodes. And then we connect them with lines, right? Or, you could do another one. You could do one on NAV, right? Let's draw the system that is NAV. But don't use any lines. See if you can call up another form of description. Because you don't have any relationships in your life that look like lines or feel like lines. So this is really important because actually, if you think that you are responding to or studying a system that is connected by nodes and lines, you're missing a lot of information. A lot of very important information. What's in those relationships? What texture are they? What color are they? What rhythm are they in? How do the relationships relate to the other relationships? So that you don't end up with some kind of idea that you can just swish in more and more and more data to get an understanding of the system. You have to actually understand what's in the relationship between the different aspects of it and what's the feeling of those relationships, right? You could describe a family and you could have, parents, kids, grandparents, and just draw some lines. But as you know, every family has a completely different logic and feel and communication that's possible in that family. So that exercise for me gets at what you're talking about. That there's a whole realm of information that's there that you're in it. You just haven't been asked to express it. It's not the normal way we express it. And if you just look at systemic process as nodes that are connected by lines, you have a different agency altogether than if you start to actually illustrate those relational processes. Your sense of agency is vastly changed by that. How do you come into that, right? If you have nodes and sticks, you can move this and remove that, and you have this first order agency is easy to come by.
Thinking about the world in models is idol worship. Right? The model of reality is not reality. It's a false idol to the real reality. And believing that it's reality is idol worship. And so models can be useful. They're always wrong. They're always potentially harmful. I think of models as intellectual tools, and they're very powerful models that are very powerful intellectual tools. If I'm teaching a kid how to use a skill saw, I teach them to be very fucking careful with it. Because yes, they can cut wood, but they can cut their hand off really easy. And if I'm teaching them how to use a gun, I teach them to be very careful with it. And when I think about math, and I think about physics, and I think about systems theory, I think of skill saws and guns. But radically more powerful than skill saws and guns, because they can make nukes and AIs and synthetic bio. I think about how to perceive reality compellingly enough that you can make a weird simulation of reality that is powerful enough to actually destroy base reality or meaningful parts of it. So I think about all techne, meaning human abstractions about the world, as powerful and dangerous, and that they have to be held that way. They should be taught that way.
This love of models is another one of these lurking ghosts where you think you can just reach for something and it's going to help. It's going to give us assistance in this. And if you don't remember that it's just a map. And the thing is, you don't. Most of the time, people forget that their map is a map. And they think, yeah, but this is how it is. We've done the illustration. We've done this thing. We started tonight with a piece of music. And in a way, a piece of music is also a map. But it's a very different kind of map. Because you're invited into it with many more forms of your process of making sense, of memory, of emotion, of was it Isadora Duncan who said, I can't remember who it was, or Anais Nin it might have been, that you listen to music with every part of your being. So most of the time the map that you draw does not call upon every part of your being, and it doesn't allow for you to completely interpret it differently next time. This is important. Because if what we're talking about is life, then the information and our way of moving with information must also be alive. What does that mean? To have information that's alive. And what does it bring from you? What does it call from you? When you hear a piece of music, what's coming up through you? And I think that, again, coming back to agency that is at nth order, it looks different. It feels different. It's another thing. It doesn't feel like a shopping list or a to-do list or a steering committee. It feels very different because it is coming from another direction. So, you know, I use this example a lot, but we have the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And the Sustainable Development Goals, if you just look at them, there's a whole meta message there. What does the culture that we're in look for? What's the appetite for information? What is it? Well, we like boxes. we like boxes. We like to separate things. We feel like we have this under control when we can do this. There's a way in, there's a kind of agency that those boxes have, trillions of dollars have been put into committees for each one of those boxes. And people are beginning to, even get involved in how they are, pick 3. Okay. But if you look at this image that we have right here, right there, where there's a mother nursing her baby, I would invite you to see every single Sustainable Development Goal is right there. That requires, and as mammals to continue, we must be able to feed the babies. And the babies have to be able to feed the babies. And the babies have to be able to feed the babies. And the people who make the food have to be able to feed their babies. And the people who make the clothes have to feed their babies. And we need air, and we need water, and we need soil, we need equality, we need respect for each other, and we need the whole picture is right there. So this is what I mean by the logic is so different. At first, it doesn't look like something you can interact with. Sorry. But there it is. The model.
Yeah, I was thinking that it seems like there's this overwhelming complexity. There's 50 million chemicals in the database of the American Chemical Society. And to try to think about what all the endocrine disrupting and neurotoxic and carcinogenic effects of all of them, plus the combinatorial effects of them, and et cetera, are. Except you don't actually have to do that. Like the simplicity of don't make systems that have to grow forever. That's dumb. Don't make systems that extract resources faster than they can replenish themselves or that create pollution. That's dumb. Like the actual logics of thriving systems are pretty simple. So there's a second simplicity. There's a complexity that people have to have if they want to try to understand how to interface with these systems, which we do have to do temporarily to change them. I want people to learn how to lobby for government subsidies as well as the big pharma and big ag and big chemical companies do, but for the exact opposite side. Right? I want people to learn how to convert toxic subsidies in chemical agriculture to regenerative agriculture, because then the market topology will start to move the world in a better direction. That does require some real understanding of financial and political systems. But long term, that's actually not the kind of intelligence that humans need to have. Long term, it is interesting how much more simple it is to be able to think in second simplicity and first principles.
I've been fascinated lately. I just finished this new book, and I'm really excited about that. And as I finished it, I felt a little bit free from all the thinking that I had been working on for years. And it opened up the door for new things to start roaring in. And there's this tiny little piece that's about this fantastic possibility that every time the seasons change, every single organism changes. And the relationship that makes life does not. Nothing gets broken. When we're talking about the meta crisis, one of the more difficult conundrums in this is how to fix one thing without breaking 6 others. The externalities, the puzzle requires action, but every action seems to make it worse, seems to break something else. So what are the ways in which we as living creatures can also begin to make change toward life that doesn't break life?
I want to say something about what you said there. The Anthropocene is complex, not complicated. It seems like it's complicated. An individual building is complicated, a laptop is complicated, anything with a blueprint is complicated, but the Anthropocene is complex. It is being created by human activity mediated by sociologies and economies and cultures and things like that, and it's evolving, right? The technosphere is actually evolving. And it's also symbiotic. In the same way that a single animal can't live by themselves, that you have predators and prey and the plants, you have these kind of self-sustaining guilds. Each technology requires lots of other technologies to exist, and then it gives rise to new technologies. It creates environmental niches that give rise to new things. The problem is that the human-built world, the way we have built it, the technosphere, social sphere complex, is complex in a way that is incompatible with the biosphere. And so it is an accelerating complex system that is debasing the biological substrate that it depends upon, which is why it's suicidal. And if you think about, I don't know if everybody has read Meditations on Moloch or heard me talk about it, but if you think about a $100 trillion a day economy, where all of that money is a decentralized incentive system, incentivizing all of the humans to figure out new ways to make money and or do more of the existing ways, which means that it's incentivizing search algorithms and optimization algorithms. It's running on 8 billion people, but it's also running all 8 billion people. So as powerful as parallel computational processing is, and why the cloud became so much better than supercomputers, being able to run a lot of parallel process, this is parallel process against things that are already general intelligent, on top of general intelligences. And then all the computational intelligence and narrow AIs are being built into this system. And this system has an imperative, right? It has a built-in growth imperative that involves all countries and all technologies. And anyone who does the bidding of that system well gets more power within it. And anyone who goes against that system is also going against those who are doing well in it, and they'll get downregulated. And that thing totally is what's causing climate change. Nobody wants climate change, but that thing is causing it. And that thing is driving AI arms races and is causing species extinction and boiling the oceans. That thing is on a suicidal path. That thing does have to get killed. And killed or converted. If we want a habitable biosphere and responsible use of tech to be a possibility.
And the trick is, it is actually functioning like an ecology.
Yep.
And that's,
which means super resilient.
It's super resilient. It's responsive, and that our bodies are actually dependent upon it right now. So we have an ecology of crises. And that's a really big problem, because it's not like a machine. If you lift up the hood of your truck, you can pull out parts and replace them. This is not that. It's compensatory. It's interdependent. It's patterning and repatterning, and it's moving. It's
And super intelligent.
yeah. So, I think for me, one of the things that I think is important, what's important, is not to underestimate what it takes to actually be in this moment and to participate in the process of shifting or killing it. Don't lose morale, because we need you to keep playing music, keep falling in love, keep loving your babies, keep taking care of each other. But at the same time, don't be thinking that this is simply a matter of making a new model. And that the trickery of what it is that we're working with here is significant. It's significant. And in some ways, we don't understand it any more than we really understand what makes a forest make life. There are ways in which these things are coming together that are beyond our perception. So be careful, right? Be careful. But be rigorous. And stay in love. Because if you fall out of love with it, you can, with life, that's not a good place to be. The reason that the meadow keeps being a meadow is because life. The reason for doing this is not because anything, just life. And that's enough. That's everything, actually. Yeah. Come on. Yeah, let's bring Nate on.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you. Good to see everyone. Just real quickly, how many have followed my work or my podcast just to get a sense? Oh my gosh. So in her typical Nora way, I said, how long would you like me to speak? And she says, between 1 and 20 minutes. It'll be closer to 1, and then we can take a break and then reconvene and do some questions. Daniel, don't take this the wrong way, but you should get sick more often, my friend. I'm not sick. I feel pretty good. However, Daniel has recently recommended some multivitamins to me, and there's a daytime one and a nighttime one, and this afternoon I took the nighttime one, so you know of what I refer. I feel fine, but I'm a little sleepy. So I took a few notes. I think that we do know the future in some ways. We don't know what it's going to look like, but there are some biophysical constraints. Recently in my work, I talk about the 4 horsemen of the 2020s, which are, number 1, our financial claims relative to our underlying biophysical reality. And instead of tightening our belt and using less, we're doubling down and creating debt at a very fast rate. And that inevitably has to reconnect with the biophysical underpinnings of our situation, which are energy, materials, and ecology. The second category is we are rapidly changing our relationship with what is the wealth and productivity that has got us to this point. And the historical story has been about money and technology, and the reality is energy, materials, and ecology. And with the Russia-Ukraine situation, our geopolitical arrangement, and Daniel talked about all the wars in the past being started by false flags and the very sociopathic, powerful people. So there is a phase shift from a unipolar to a multipolar world. The third risk is the 6-continent supply chain and the complexity of our grocery stores and our systems and our medical supplies, because it's been based on this part of the carbon pulse, where we've outsourced everything into this really complex situation. And then the last piece is the social contract, how we get along with our fellow citizens within and between countries. And so we don't know what's going to happen specifically, but I think now there are no longer any non-radical paths ahead of us in the next decade. And so we might not know what's going to happen and the scale of what's going to happen, but I think getting to Nora's point about nth order agency, there are some no-regret strategies that exist, and the one staring us in the face is what's here this evening, is we have to start building social capital and social relationships, even if we're not solving problems, even if we're not doing things directly to prepare, because we can't really prepare other than to maybe imagine what life would be like with 30% less income or 30% less energy, and then act accordingly. But what we can do is build relationships ahead of time. I've been referring to this as rocks in the river, is if there are no psychologically, physically, emotionally, structurally full stack humans in a community when these events come and the water races faster, everything's going to tumble down. And if there are these bigger rocks that act as anchors, they help others in the community. And if there's enough rocks, they actually redirect the water as it comes through. We're working on really complicated, scary issues. Daniel's mentioned AI and biology. There's Russia not too far from here, and my country is doing just sociopathic things, not the whole country, but certain people in the country. And it can become overwhelming. I've found that the single biggest antidote for me is three things, but one in particular. One is time with my ducks and my dogs and just being in the moment with animals and my friends. Two is spending time in nature. And three, and this hit home 2 nights ago, Daniel and 6 or 7 of our close friends working on this went out for Thai food in Stockholm. By the way, so far I love Stockholm. The weather is freaking awesome. But we had dinner and we were talking about these issues, and I just felt this levity of spirit. Despite the topics that we were talking about, I was with 7 other humans who deeply care about this moment in time, and that we were helping each other. We had each other's backs. We were all working on the most meaningful thing that we could be working on. And that's worth more than money or anything. It's working with other humans on a collective path. So I have more to say, but I think I'll just stop there, and we'll take a break and then have some questions with the 3 of us. But thank you all for being here, and I have that feeling again tonight.
Mm. Yeah. So we're going to have a little break, and what we are going to have a little break. You actually don't have a break. This is the moment when you get a chance to kind of talk to each other and have a little bit of conversation around this conversation. And then we'll come back together and take some questions. So take 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Take 20 minutes, and then we'll come back together.
And if anybody comes up, I'll be bowing. Normally I'm a hugger, but I don't want to get anybody sick, so.
Thanks.
To weld this together between the American and Swedish way, well, played a Swedish blues before, and now I'll play a American blues. This is a Sleepy John Estes song.
Oh, thank you so much, Mats Kvarfort. The blues.
That was so nice.
So we are here ready with a microphone to assist, and there are also people online that have questions. Did you want to start with the people online? Okay.
So the hub in Hudiksvall has 2 questions. So I just read them for you because it's we have a bit of problem here with the technique. The first question is, how do we get away from the current financial system? And the second question is, how can we build organizations to work towards something better against the destructive powers, or better or against the destructive powers that you allude to in your conversations? Maybe we get some more questions before you answer? Or reflections?
Yeah, let's get a collection from the room and then bring them all together instead of doing it one at a time.
I wonder what are the most hopeful initiatives that you have seen so far?
It's been about a year since you did the previous event here, and I remember being there as well. What would you say has changed in your worldview since then, for the better and for the worse?
So, Nora, you were on your way to start to talk about double bind. I'd just like to bring that thread up again. And also, we need to kill it. As if it is outside of us, or is it? It's easy to think that it is outside of us.
There was this question that popped up around when is implicit change, or where, I think, is implicit change. And I'm curious about when. When is change?
Thanks. My name is Anna Bolin, and thank you for your great, inspiring talk this evening. You talk a bit about complexity and about discomfort, and how you need to enter that discomfort. And it strikes me as well that in this room we have a lot of people that are very comfortable and engaged by these ideas. How do you engage with those that are less interested? How do you engage with the discomfort and that challenge to an audience that is less willing to hear? Thanks.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, there were several of those that I have thoughts on. I'll start with the last one. There are many audiences that need to hear some versions of this, but there is not one version of this for all audiences, and I've learned that. I have a small organization, and I had choices on what is the audience. Hollywood needs to hear this story, or whatever the Swedish version of Hollywood is, where right now we're going to colonize outer space and send people there with Matt Damon to plant potatoes on Mars, or we have brain-eating zombies. And the reality is going to be in the middle. And when you give humans examples of altruism, they are 400% more likely to do altruistic acts. And we need media showing realistic versions of maybe a simpler, more local, less materialistic future to give people ideas for what to do. We also need politicians and leaders to have some sort of blueprints or plans for what's coming so that they can break glass in case of emergency, and people have thought about it cognitively ahead of the emotional moment when things are necessary. We need young people to have different understandings of the future and their role in it and their own development, like Thomas Bjorkman talks about the Nordic secret and the psychological development of young people. We need community leaders to have a little step ahead of the curve and lead action. And then there's the general public. I haven't had the bandwidth to do all that, nor does Daniel or any of us, so I've been speaking to the choir. And I think the choir is starting to grow. I call them the walking worried, people that don't really know the details, but they know something is wrong and something is coming. And, we spoke 3 nights ago to KTH University, and there were a lot of international students there from Bangladesh and Egypt and Morocco, and they were like, well, you're coming here as a person of privilege, and people in my country don't have choices, and you have choices. And so when we talk about collapse, or I call great simplification because it's less binary, people say, when is collapse coming? Well, for many, collapse is already here. So when you say, when is collapse coming, what you really mean is, when is it coming for us? So you're right to ask the question. I do think Daniel and his organization, Civilization Research Institute, is looking at a lot of really important critical risks to our civilization, like AI and bioweapons and things like that. Personally, I don't think that's something that we need to talk about with everyone. We just do the work. But there are messages that, because what can I do about AI or bioweapons? But I can help inspire and educate people to meet the future halfway. My view is we are not going to kill the superorganism. The superorganism is going to run out of high-octane fuel, and there will be a financial whoosh. And what we can do now is change the initial conditions of those future moments by education, by building community, by simplifying our own lives, by raging against the machine and protecting ecosystems and species and whatever's meaningful to you, whatever path is important. I think those are the things that we can do now. I worry about killing it because you're right, we are also it. So if it is killed, there is a potential of, instead of a bend, of a break. And I don't know how that looks, but I think to directly kill it, even if that were possible, may not be the most benign outcome. My colleagues may disagree. I'll pause there.
Should we kill it?
You want me to comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, I see Pontus's point. It is in us, of us, all around us, running through us. But I also feel there is this vampire, and it is a life-sucking vampire. It's what it does. It eats life. So there is another part of me that realizes that it is the undead. I mean, in the metaphor of the vampire, it's an undead thing. And that means that it eats life.
It eats future life and keeps current life comfortable and convenient.
Mm-hmm. It eats all sorts of life, I think.
No, yeah. The 13 species that it extincts every day is current life that are all being fucked. And the fact that, as you know well, there's 1% of the mammal biomass in the wild that there are in factory farms today, that's eating life in the most gruesome way possible. It is also eating the possibility for future life.
We have this dynamic because we've done so many podcasts. He can tell my facial expressions when I want to say something.
I'm going to sit between
the
boys, no talking.
The Moloch thing that you're asking, like, to what degree is it in us? There's something weird about sapiens relative to the other species that we inhabit the world with. Maybe some of the earlier hominids had some amount of this quality, but they're not here anymore. That does not necessitate Moloch in the metacrisis, but it certainly makes it possible. Which is, as huge as whale brains are, and as sentient as they are, and in my guess, probably have deeper sentience than us in many ways. They don't figure out how to protect themselves from whaling ships. There is a certain kind of abstraction that leads to techne, that leads to an Anthropocene they don't have. And it does seem like the best anthropological story we have currently is that Homo habilis and Australopithecus and all of the earlier hominids that we co-inhabited the planet with were extincted by us. Because even though they were tool making, we were doubling down on the tool making and tool advancing capacity cerebrally. And it does seem like many of the megafauna that were extincted by our early overhunting. I think when Ian McGilchrist talks about the master and the emissary, where he's saying that the right hemispheric modes of being that are more oriented to what David Bohm would have talked about as a perceiving wholeness in a very wide, non-semiotically mediated way, and the left brain perceiving semiotically mediated parts, being able to see being able to model, right, and being able to see some parts having causal relationships to other parts, i.e. techne, both cognitive techne and the applied physical techne, but currency and democracy and language are techne. What Ian was saying is that the left brain has to be an emissary in service to the right brain because it's very good at goal achieving, but it's not good at picking the right goals. And if it doesn't have something binding what the right goals are that is perceiving life widely, in the process of being very good at goal achieving with narrow goals, it'll harm a lot of things. And then in the process of harming things, other people will have to do comparable stuff to deal with those people. And then you get an arms race, you get an exponential curve, and you get Moloch. I think our capacity for recursive abstraction led to a degree of science that gives us the Large Hadron Collider and the ability to split the nucleus of an atom, right? But it also gives us the ability for the prayer of the Bodhisattva that says, I want to bind myself to all sentient beings throughout all time, space, and history. So if that property, that capacity for perceiving wholeness and having our goals bound to that has to bind the goal achieving. That would be wisdom binding power. If we get that at the level of not just some people, because then of course you always have a situation where someone can do the sociopathic thing and win, and then everyone has to race to do the sociopathic thing or get taken over. So it's not just within some people the master has to bind the emissary. It's that also holistically everyone has to ensure that no one is pursuing advanced goal achieving in service of life-harming goals. And because we have this capacity to see the world and model it and do science, and then because of science do applied tech, and because of that we can build powerful enough systems to destroy this thing. Because we have that ability, the other ability, the bodhisattva ability, has to be developed enough and bind that thing, or we do self-terminate. So that's in all of us. I would not say there's an even distribution of it in everybody. We started doing a research project recently on what the equivalent of sociopathy and dark triad traits in indigenous cultures were. And we haven't finished, but this is something I'm very interested in. And for the most part, what we've seen so far is there was radically less of that trait because there wasn't an evolutionary niche for it. Because in a small Dunbar tribe, if you lied, everybody knew you lied. And if you fucked somebody, you were fucking the people that your life depends upon. And so in that small environment, there was just not a niche for it. The niche came later. I did talk to a Lakota scholar who said in the Lakota tribe, if a kid had the traits that they referred to as the equivalent of sociopathy, the whole tribe worked to heal it in them. And if they didn't heal it in them, at the rite of passage ceremony of puberty where they become an adult, they were killed. Because they said that if that didn't happen, those people, when they grew up, always caused war. I think so. I think there's not an even distribution of traits. There's definitely some roots of the metacrisis that live in everybody.
I want to go to this question of where do you see hope, and tie it into what you're saying. So probably my favorite work that I've seen, besides the two of you, of course, is with the clinic in Italy that works on paralysis. Now, I first became interested in this clinic, paralysis and terminal pain. So I became interested in this with the early researchers of the Bateson Institute, one of which was Rex, who went with me to this clinic. And our question that we went with was, how do systems get unstuck? We were interested in stuckness, and paralysis is stuckness. It's not a good question because it depends on where you draw the edge of the stuckness, right? Where if you're not careful and you say the system is stuck, what you're not seeing is the wild compensatory processes that take place around the edges to maintain a stuckness. If you have a stuckness, you're only looking in one part of the system. So it's not a good question, but nevertheless, it was a good starting place. And we went to this clinic, and what I saw there was, without question, the most beautiful systemic work I've ever seen to this day. And what they did required no beeping things. It required no injections. It required a fascinating process in which, for example, the practitioner would offer a small wooden block with a spiral in it and ask the patient to describe what it would feel like to run their finger around that spiral. Not to do it, but to describe it verbally. Okay, so I'm inviting you into this because I want you to notice all the cognitive processes that are necessary to do just that. Okay, that's visual, that's memory, that's verbal, that's tactile, that's relational, that's cultural. There's a whole lot just right there. What they didn't do was go up to that frozen arm of the person in paralysis and try to open it. Massage it, acupuncture it, treat it, stretch it, open it. They didn't do that. Then they would give the block again, and this time run the finger of the good hand, if there was one, around very slowly. And at the end of that movement around the spiral, ask the question, not what did you feel, but what's the difference? Okay, and in that question, what is being required for a response is actually 3 versions, okay? It's what they felt the first time, what they felt the second time, and what the difference was. So that's complicated. And then it's also visual, tactile, temperature comes in with this one. Measurement, movement of arm. It's like, when you move your finger around a spiral, there's measurement happening. How far is it around? Speed, balance, again, speech, etc. So what's happening in this process, and this is where the inspiration for the Warm Data Lab came from, is that these different aspects of cognitive learning are actually informing each other. And they're doing so inside the individual in a way that is absolutely free to move in the way that it moves according to that person. That's cool. So, and I would, obviously I wouldn't be that impressed with it if I didn't see that it was also working. So what I am leery of is this idea that it's ever remotely beneficial to tell people what they should think, what they should do, or how they should feel. And what I love about that process is the way in which there is a wilderness of connective processes that are shaping and informing each other. Right? So I asked them, because I noticed they weren't going for the what I would call the pathology, the paralysis. They didn't go for the thing. It wasn't a first order corrective. This is an example of an nth order response. I want you to be, we've been talking about nth order agency tonight and how it doesn't look like what you think it's going to look like. This is an example. So, of course, what happens is that not only do these people change in terms of their possibility of how their body moves and understands their world, but their whole personality opens into new curiosity, new artistic creation. Now, all sorts of things happen. Capacities for emotion, capacities for all sorts of things that maybe they didn't have before they were paralyzed, actually. So what's pathology? What's pathology? And when I asked them this, I asked it because I realized that the thing I saw wasn't what they were seeing. And what their response was that pathology is the organism's inability to make sense of its world. That's a really interesting definition of pathology. So what is happening in that exercise is that there is a multi-sensorial, multi-cognitive process that is given an opportunity to reconnect, to make new formations of sense-making of what it is to be in the world. They're not healing them. They're not putting them back how they were. They're not reconstituting. They're not at all. So we changed our question to how do systems learn? Not how do they get unstuck? And there's a whole lot of work on that. But you asked what for me was the most hopeful, and it was that because of this incredible insight there for the potential for things to make connection that are not necessarily doing it explicitly. All right, we talked about implicit change and when is it? And it's an interesting question because when is it? And suddenly it happens. And you don't know how far you are on the X line before you have one more minute and suddenly there's a shift, there's a learning. And for me, this also ties into the question around orgs and how can organizations do better, which is, I'm just paraphrasing what you said. Which, for us, for what I'm interested in with that, is working with organizations, and when we do warm data work with organizations, we don't allow for there to be a closed system. There is an illusion that an organization ends at the edge of the organization. This is part of the problem. So when we do warm data labs with organizations, we ask them to be sure that everyone who comes invites people from their life, their family, their friends, people from the community, so that the membrane is moved, so that there is a different kind of accountability in the room, so that people can actually be in another way besides just tacitly protecting their employment, which is one of the dangers of doing, development workshops with organizations, is that they don't really want to develop past that point where they could lose their job. It's a problem. Yeah. Okay, so that was, there's a few.
Let me build on that and then circle back to the question about hope. So what I've learned from you, among other things, is you can't just look at the thing. You have to look at the thing in the context of other things. And this has origins in biology, multi-level selection. It's not just that we're competitive creatures, but we're also cooperative creatures, and those things were both locked in our history. But applying it to my work and your work, Daniel and I met a few years ago, and I'm working on energy, ecology, human behavior, and Daniel's working on existential risks, AI and things like that. And we became friends, and we started to interact our contexts, and a couple things happened. 3 things happened. At least 3 things happened. One is we actually constrained each other's stories, because he didn't really know about my stuff and I didn't know about his stuff. So we were both like, oh man, things are worse than we thought, because I didn't know about your stuff. The second thing that happened is we became friends and we supported each other, and then we introduced each other to other people, and the network expanded and there was an emergence there. And the third thing that happened is we're influencing a conversation, and there's an emergence that is unknown. And we're shifting the conversation in a small way, but that's what's happening now that gives me hope, is there are hundreds of thousands of humans that are starting to pay attention to this conversation. And I am, in my role as a podcaster or whatever, I'm increasingly more comfortable not knowing what to do, because I always used to feel if I say these are the problems, I felt guilty leaving the room without having the solutions. So a year ago, I started to use the word responses instead of solutions. And now I'm even more comfortable just trying to set the table and it was really unexpected to me that, oh yeah, last year I started a podcast because I know a lot of people like Daniel and Nora, and I wanted to listen to what they had to say. But it's changed me. I'm trying to share knowledge with other humans. I am learning and changing in the process. And I just want to like broaden this conversation to more humans to have this emergent thing with the meadow and the context. And I feel that it's actually happening. And that's what gives me hope, is the better side of humanity. Pontus, you said, should we kill it? We are at a unique time. Okay, going back to your thing, I'll add a depressing fact, but there's a reason. 10,000 years ago, for every human that was on the planet, there were 15,000 pounds of mammals, wild mammals. By the year 1800, for every human on the planet, there were 200 pounds of mammals. During that 10,000 years, it was largely that human population went up that drove that. But since 1800, we've gone from 200 pounds to 5 pounds of mammals per human alive. And that is an increase in human population, but it also is a decimation of nature. So what we're doing, this ecocidal tendency that we're having, this has been in play for 10,000 years. What's different now is the scale of it, and this room full of people and others who are actually aware of it, aware of where we came from, how we got here, what we're doing, what we actually need, and having these conversations. So we are aware of it now. Is our awareness in a Heisenberg sort of observing science to change it? Are we aware of the superorganism or Moloch or whatever you say? Is that enough to change it in an emerging way, to steer it, to shrink it, to transform it, is a question I think about a lot.
But run away. I mean, there's a runaway. And I remember the first time I went to a sort of a disclosure of an IPCC report, and I looked at all the details, and I said, yeah, but what about the runaway? Where's that part of this? And they said, oh, no, we don't do that. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. So we have all of this bad news, and you haven't done the runaway? This is really incredible. Because that's the part where the math goes into chaos math. It's not even calculable at that point. It's you do it for understanding, but not for calculations. And what I want to bring in is that there's an importance to this coming together of learning and studying and playing music and eating and having babies. And this, we need to do this. Understanding that what we are actually responding to at this point is runaway, which is really a different kind of response. And what I keep perceiving is that there's this grabbing need to pull one issue at a time, and it's in motion now. We're in runaway. We're in it. So how do you respond to runaway collectively is actually also with runaway, but runaway of another kind.
Like runaway.
Like people meeting people, meeting people, meeting people. Like the way in which, if we have a conversation here, and you guys all go home, and you have a conversation with somebody, that conversation will be a little bit different. And then that person talks to someone, and it's a little bit different. That something has, this is the implicit part, that something has shifted. And maybe it's like really not the thing you thought. Maybe it's recognizing, yeah, those guys got up there and they were totally off script and they were actually in conversation. And we don't see that very often. Maybe it's that, I don't know, that Daniel came even though he was sick. But seriously, that's an act of love. That's a gift. So just recognizing how potent these nth order responses are in Runaway, because that's what we're dealing with. So I just wanted to bring that word in the room because I feel like it should be here.
I had something I was feeling to share about the question of hope, optimism. There's a tremendous amount of, like, I guess you can call it hope. It's more like warmth and joy that I feel every time I go to an animal shelter and watch the people who take care of animals. Every time I watch a teacher or a nurse who really puts in discretionary effort to care for the kids and the people they're caring for. When I see people who run orphanages, like all the people who have just extremely high care, I mean, it's like, that's the species I love. That's the human species I love. What do I feel optimistic about in terms of something converging to the appropriate scale and speed of the meta-crisis? I can say what I sense that it can be, but I don't see it happening yet. I mean, I love a lot of the work in regenerative agriculture and permaculture and things like that, but overall, the total number of global catastrophic risks is increasing each year, and the probability of all of them is increasing. So we're not on track. Like, we're not converging. One thing I wanted to say, though, is my partner, Summer, you can ask her if you want to. Dispositionally, just as a person, I am pegged almost as far to the optimist side as somebody can be, which you might actually think is funny, given the nature of my work. But like in almost all personal situations, I'm like, oh, we'll figure it out. Oh, if there's a solution, we'll figure it out. It'll be no problem. And so that's my disposition. I actually trust people who do catastrophic risk work, who have an optimistic disposition more, because otherwise they might just be catastrophizing. I know a lot of people who are actually exceptional at catastrophic risk work because they just catastrophize all the fucking time. But I really don't think I have a catastrophizing disposition. I run the dialectics on all these things, and it's just like, damn, the trajectories are pretty clear. I think if you haven't studied it, most people here don't have a clear sense of how much one person who really learns strategy and implements it intensively can affect the world. Like, I don't think many people here understand how much Henry Kissinger actually architected the world. But study it a little bit. You'll be fucking mind blown. I don't think most people have a sense of how much one George Soros or Bill Gates affects the world relative to an average person. But it's so many orders of magnitude. It's not like 100 times more or 1,000 times more. But when I see the people who run animal shelters, when I see the Jane Goodalls, they don't learn how to do what Kissinger knows how to do, or what Soros knows how to do. They don't learn how to capture the financial systems or the political systems or the media and mindset of the people. If you want to know the thing that I feel hopeful about, it's people with Jane Goodall's heart learning how to do Kissingerian stuff. Learning how to actually capture and change the systems of power without being affected by them. And there's a particular kind of like priesthood, or whatever you want to call it, that someone has to take to enter that, not for self-will. I don't know if people have ever, you know, like the very top people at BlackRock, the very top people at the largest financial institutions or in the CIA work way the fuck harder than almost everybody else does. Like, they are working all the goddamn time. They have a degree of drive and ambition that is almost mind-blowing, and they learn the most powerful tools of technological advantage. And so if the world is to do better, it does need people who learn the tools of technological advantage and power and are willing to work extremely hard, but not for self-serving goals, and not even for nation-state goals, but for the well-being of the commons long term. And then that won't be the future world, but that is totally the one that has to happen in transition.
Using the devil's tools for Gaia's work.
Oh, do we want to take another couple questions? Okay.
Hi. Thank you. I have a question about words, because there seems to be an interesting difference between you, Daniel, and you, Nora, and how you approach words. And you spoke a little bit about it in the beginning, because the two of you think similarly, but you speak in different ways. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you attend to words, especially when you adopt new words. What are good words? What are good words in different contexts? What do good words do?
You make up lots of words. Do you want to speak to that?
Okay. May I ask, if maybe you can connect these two, actually, in a certain way. The word that stuck with me, you mentioned it several times, is transformation. And it made me think what it actually takes to transform anything. And tantric practices came to my mind. I don't mean sexual practices, I just mean really transforming the energies and what it takes from a person, individual person, to sit with the heaviest of energies, the anger, the rage, the extremes of desire. And it seems that the way through, by experience and just by also learning the practices, is the way to the other side is the way through. There is no way to circumnavigate the darkness at all. And this is something that takes a lot from an individual person to train, takes a lifetime to get good at it. If we just scale it up to a collective level, how can we possibly transform without total immersion in darkness first to get to the other side? So there is no semantics that can get us out of the experience, it seems. I'd just like to hear the thoughts about it.
Do you want to answer? Or?
No, we can bring a couple more.
Okay. Hello. Thank you very much for a great talk. There is a word that I like, that I encountered, I think in my own head, but I'm sure it's been elsewhere. Habitalism, I call it. Because capitalism, for all its faults, has a very clear goal: maximize profit. And then all the little rivers kind of go into this giant ocean of destruction. But I was at a demonstration climate change thing the other day, and one speaker talked about this village that's being flooded. Another spoke about this tree that's being endangered. And there's just problem after problem after problem. And after a while, I tuned out because it's just too much, and I can't do anything about all these things. And I feel that what our movement really would need is a goal, an incentive structure that capitalism has and is great at, that binds us. Because we're kind of all trying, there's this quote that I love: for every one who strikes at the roots of evil, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches. And I feel that there's so much branch hacking and very little agreement on what is the root and how can we strike it together. And so that's a statement, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything you've said so far. I'm not really sure what question I've got, but I think what I'm missing, you started off talking about the state with institutions, and you've described the effect of the market in its destructive growth nature. If we say that society or civilization comprises the state, the market, and civil society, what function do you see that villages and commoning, perhaps in the sense of Elinor Ostrom's work, what function does that have in learning resilient patterns to meet the inevitable? Because we can't continue what we're doing. What do we do when this doesn't work anymore? How do we meet that in the terms of the village? And what do you see as commoning? What could that be as a verb?
Thank you so much so far. I'll raise this question of arms race that we're really facing in the world. That feels very scary. But how can we de-escalate this in a practical way? What can we do about it?
Which arms race?
The whole world. It's like you were talking about this different polarization and building this polarized world.
Another one?
Go ahead, one more and then we'll dive in.
Thank you. So you're talking earlier about that you could, if you wanted to, you could sort of boil down the meta crisis to sociopaths run the world and everyone is basically an enabler towards those sociopaths. Okay. So talking about the people that you were discussing there that have orders, 10, 20 orders of magnitude of influence compared to a normal person, how do we stop producing that? How do we stop producing that sort of concentration of power and influence? And why is it that most of them come from the United States? And is there something there to look at in terms of what can we do to reduce that happening in the United States? And how could we avoid it happening in other places by not making the same mistakes?
That's enough, I think. And I think we need to also get this guy home soon. Words. There's no amount of new words that you can make that will actually stay new words. All the words start to carry and get metabolized by the existing epistemologies and perceptions. But it's still important to try to communicate in new ways and to make new words, because there is the possibility of a gap. And in that gap, there's the possibility of something new coming in. To begin to articulate a new theory or to open up a new way of describing something, it doesn't actually change the world, but it changes what it's possible to communicate in the world. And that's enormous. That's big. We can look around and say, well, we have to change the parts, or we can say we have to change the relationships because we're systems thinkers. Then we can say, well, we have to change communication because actually relationships are made of communication. But then what's it possible to actually communicate? Where does that live? Right? We're in a room right here where there's all sorts of constraints around what is possible to communicate. You guys have been in a different room all week, and what it's possible to communicate in this room is different. It's not written on the wall somewhere. There's no instructions explicitly pasted anywhere, but it's everywhere. What's it possible to communicate? And arguably, the entire movement and structure of a systemic process is shifted inside those invisible possibility realms. I'll just stop.
I have a brief follow-up to that. Words are incredibly powerful, but over time, words become culturally burned terms, like neoclassical economics or fractional reserve banking or climate change. Climate change means something to a certain number of humans, and then another group of humans build up antibodies when they hear that term. And so it has become no longer a functional term to have real discourse. So we need to keep inventing or communicating new terms that describe our reality that can broaden the conversation. I don't know how to do that, but so many of our words immediately set off identity, or it just closes the conversation. We need words that open the conversation.
So I love speaking with you guys because I do use words really differently, and tone and gesture. And it makes it possible to open up different kinds of ways of thinking. But then you guys come in, and you also are bringing in this wonderful precision and this crispy thing. It's satisfying in another way, right? It feeds another kind of curiosity. It allows me to explore in another whole dimension when I hear you speak. And then maybe I can bring in an invitation to explore a different set of textures and possibilities and experiences. And maybe those two can start to resonate off each other in ways that are absolutely unique to you. And that's, I think, very exciting. So there's part of what is interesting is what I might say, or what Nate might say, or what Daniel might say. But I think what's really fascinating is what we didn't say, but what actually formed and connected and tissued in you.
Just to follow up, while you were speaking, I'm going to make a concerted effort that in the future, when unless I'm at an important governmental thing, instead of using the word climate change, instead of using the word global warming, which is a euphemism, I'm going to start using the word global heating, which is an exact description of the mechanism that's happening. And it's not used, but it's a good description. So I'm going to try to use that more.
I'll jump to the question about how do we stop developing people that have world steering sociopathic orientation, and do they disproportionately come from the US? The answer is kind of, but also kind of not. In the question of who's the most powerful person in the world, it's a weird question because, but if one wanted to ask that question, Xi Jinping would certainly be one of the contenders, and he's not from the US. And interestingly, when I mentioned Kissinger, who's definitely architected a US system, he is not from the US. It was him and Zbigniew Brzezinski and a few of the people that actually architected the post-World War II system in the U.S. were Austro-Hungarians who were brought over who had a history of fighting the Ottomans and, a unique geopolitical advantage. When you look at Operation Paperclip and all of the Jewish, German, as well as Nazi German scientists the U.S. brought over. Obviously, Wernher von Braun, who built the Apollo project, was a Nazi rocketeer, and most of the people at Los Alamos were, Jewish scientists from Germany. There was this long-standing joke that whether the U.S. or USSR would win the Cold War was which one got the better Nazi scientists, because they each got over 1,000 of the scientists. And that is why Germany was roughly 30 years ahead of both of the other countries going into World War II. If you go back to, as we were mentioning, Genghis Khan or Alexander or whatever, you can see that the world is at different power centers at different times. And so if you have an Elon Musk who's born in South Africa, of course Silicon Valley is the place to go currently. But DeepMind was founded in UK and is the most advanced commercial artificial intelligence org. So what I would say is that there are places where power is concentrated, and those places attract people who want to play those particular games of power and will be able to play those games of power well. Increasingly, the top tier of the game of power is not national. It plays between nation states, but is not really sovereign to nation states. How do you stop incentivizing it is a very interesting question. If there wasn't unbounded private property ownership, the incentive would mostly be gone. If there wasn't a fungible currency with which you could get everything, and with financial services where pools of the currency continue to just make more money on themselves, much of the incentive would be gone. If you think about a world before fungible currencies, where you just had to have real, or just say before currencies, and you had real commodities, a little bit of lumber is useful. As you get more and more lumber, you get a diminishing marginal value on the lumber because you can't use it, you can't move it fast enough, and it starts to just become like a big pain in the ass. The same is true for ore or anything. So you get kind of a diminishing return curve on the unit value of the thing. But if I can sell the thing in real time to the market for currency, which is an optionality token for any other kind of value, and then I put interest on that, where that thing not only can be converted instantly to any other thing that I want, but it goes up exponentially just by sitting on it, now there is an infinite incentive to acquire more. There's never a diminishing return on acquiring more. And in fact, if I don't acquire more and the other guy does, he's going to beat me. So as long as you have a situation where you have a fungible currency with interest in financial services and the primary access to resource mediated by private property, you will not stop incentivizing this thing. So those macroeconomic structures have to change. Those are very, very deep. I didn't just talk about Glass-Steagall and gold backing. I talked about the fungibility of currency itself, private property, and interest. But those are examples that if there is going to be a civilization long-term, there won't still be those structures long-term. I don't think we will have a replicator, right? Star Trek actually didn't solve the problem. They said, let's have a replicator where there's infinite abundance for everybody. And because there's infinite abundance for everyone, we don't have to deal with scarcity and conflict. And nobody actually wants shit because there's no differential advantage of having shit because it all just comes out of the vacuum. But it did allow you to a certain thought experiment, which was nice. We have to figure out how to do that within still physical scarcity and yeah.
I just actually want to thank everybody for coming tonight and riding along with us through this. And thank you to NAV for hosting us. Daniel and Anna and Johanna for the beautiful food and all the people who participated in making that happen. If there's some of you who haven't spent much time at NAV, I would like to really invite you to check out what's going on here, because this is another place where I see hope. I've lived in a lot of communities in my life, different kinds of communities. I was a California kid in the 70s. Come on, I've done that. And I would say pretty much 100% of the time that was a fiasco. And there's something that's happening here that's very, very interesting. And I always try to get Daniel to talk about it. How do you do it? What's your secret? But he won't talk about it. Because I think there's a something that's outside of the how-to that makes it work. Did you ever read that book when you were a kid, The Phantom Toll Booth? And in The Phantom Toll Booth, there's this character, Milo, and his dog, and they get given this little car, and they're trying to figure out how to make the car go, and they're pushing all the buttons and turning the keys and doing everything. And then finally they sit there in silence, because it turns out that the car goes without saying. And there's something about NAV that has that in it. This is not a community project. This is actually an art form. So next time we do this, we're going to get you up here, Daniel, and you're not going to be able to hide back there on the screens, because so much of what we're talking about is actually happening right here. So thank you for hosting us, and thank you, Nate, for coming along and being with us. And
I like it here. I'd be happy to come back.
yay, me too. And Daniel, I know I'm not allowed to hug you, but I want to. And thanks to all of you. So good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
And then, yes. So this is just thank you back to you, actually. A little poem written here and sitting and listening to what is happening in all of us, I think. So it goes like this. The blues of our times, the blues of importance. It is hard to know where the beginning is in what seems like never-ending crisis. And yet the blues calls us to be there with and for each other, to be in relation to chaos together, as the institutional structures are criminally insane and suicidally insane, and what we are facing is invisibly right in our face, looking deadly fine, as we are ghosted by our own love for life, being surrounded by ghosts telling us this is how it is. And yet, let not be seduced by the alarm bells. Pay attention, drop the certainty, gain the learning through what seems impossible. We are probably going to fail as a species. Let's quit. Stop doing whatever is not being existentially rebellious together. Be careful and stay in love. What can the human nature do? Begin to perceive each other in this very serious moment of being alive. The disorientation is not an easy sail. Sociopaths run the world winning nothing, and everyone is adopting, losing everything. But disorientation is the gift. Let's have fevers and learn to speak with animals. What is in it for me does not arise in someone that is in it, in the membership of the omni-relational me of all my relations. In no private property other human properties will be born. Perceive wholeness as a bodhisattva, bonding with the ecocidal, goal-oriented, apart-taking, hollow way of being as a healing matter of life or death. See the pathological gesture telling you of its inability to make sense of the world. And there are graceful, invisible magic that can make things and everything happen. All we need to do, and what we can do, is to feed the babies the simple sophistication of changing with seasons, with the sense of the spiral anew, shifting ways of behaving, daring death without breaking with life. There are no longer no radical paths ahead. Learn to capture the system of power without being affected by it for the common. Build relationships. Be in the care. Be anchors. Be with dogs. Be with people you care for. Run away to us. Know the collapse is already happening. Change the initial moment of that future in the now that already happened.